My name's Mike. I'm 41, and I live in Syracuse, New York. You know, up until a few months ago, if you'd asked me about my family, I would have shrugged and said we were all right, nothing special, but nothing broken. But that was before the food wars started with my younger sister Emily. She's 34, single, still living with our parents, and has this uncanny talent for making everything about herself. The first signs were small: a slice of pizza gone missing, half a tub of ice cream mysteriously eaten. I laughed it off at first. Who cares, right? But then it got personal. I'd come home from work, exhausted, craving the lasagna I'd made the night before, only to find the empty dish in the sink, like a crime scene, with her favorite fork still sitting there as evidence. And every time I confronted her, Emily's response was the same: a sheepish grin, a shrug, some half-hearted apology that melted away before it reached her eyes. My parents? Oh, they just wave it off. Mike, she's your sister. Be nice. But when you've worked a 12-hour shift and all you want is your dinner, trust me, be nice starts to wear thin. I started labeling my food, hiding it in the back of the fridge, even stashing snacks in my room like some paranoid teenager. But Emily? She had radar. Somehow, she always found it. And it wasn't just annoying anymore. It was disrespect. It was betrayal wrapped in aluminum foil. It was a Thursday night when the fuse finally burned down. I'd poured myself into making that pasta, my own little masterpiece, the kind of meal you don't just eat, you look forward to. Homemade sauce simmered for hours, fresh Parmesan shaved just right, pasta cooked to perfection. It was waiting in the fridge, a small promise to myself that tomorrow, after slogging through yet another mind-numbing work week, I'd have one thing to savor. But when I opened the fridge that night, I froze. The container was gone. Not just picked at, not just tampered with, gone. As if it had never existed. I stared into that cold white void, a lump rising in my throat, hands gripping the door tighter as my mind raced. Maybe I moved it? Maybe it fell behind something? No. I knew better. Then I heard it. The faint, unmistakable scrape of a fork against a plate. I turned slowly, almost afraid to confirm what my gut already knew. And there she was, Emily, curled up on the couch like a satisfied cat, fork twirling, eyes on the TV, devouring my pasta with the casual delight of someone who'd never known restraint. I can't describe the cocktail of emotions that shot through me: anger, disbelief, exhaustion, but most of all, that crushing sense of being invisible, of being dismissed. And still, I didn't yell. I didn't slam the fridge or storm into the room. I just stood there, letting the cold air wash over my face as something in me shifted. It was a quiet, almost surgical snap, the kind that happens when a line has been crossed one too many times. That night, lying in bed staring at the ceiling, I realized something. If words weren't enough, maybe consequences would be. By 3 a.m., the idea had hardened into something more than a passing thought. I'd been the nice guy for too long, the one who let things slide, who forgave, who excused. But niceness only works when the other side has limits, and Emily didn't. She was the kind of person who'd press until there was no more give. So maybe, just maybe, it was time to give her a lesson in boundaries. The next afternoon, I found myself at the pharmacy, standing in an aisle I never thought I'd visit. My fingers hovered awkwardly over a box of laxatives, heart pounding in my ears. I laughed under my breath at the ridiculousness of it, at the sheer pettiness. But there was a hard edge to that laugh, the kind that comes when you've been backed into a corner. I grabbed the box, paid in cash, because God forbid the pharmacist be Emily's friend, and went home. Cooking that pasta was a strangely focused experience. My hands were steady, my mind sharp, no second-guessing, no hesitation. Garlic sizzling in olive oil, the aroma filling the kitchen, the sauce thickening just right. And then, just before finishing, I slipped the crushed tablets into the pot, stirring slowly, watching as they disappeared without a trace. It felt wrong, but also, in a twisted way, necessary. A quiet voice in the back of my head whispered, "You're better than this." But another voice, the one that had been ignored too long, answered back, "Maybe. But I'm also tired." That night, I set the pasta on the middle shelf of the fridge. No labels. No warnings. Just temptation sitting there like a baited trap. The next 24 hours were the longest I'd felt in years. I walked through the house like I was carrying some terrible secret, my chest tight, my heart jumping every time I heard footsteps near the kitchen. It was like watching a ticking clock in slow motion. I caught myself staring at the fridge door, imagining it swinging open, imagining Emily's fingers wrapping around the container, imagining the first bite. Around noon the next day, the moment arrived. I was upstairs, pretending to read, though every muscle in my body was tense, every nerve on edge. I heard the soft clatter of the fridge door, the rustle of Tupperware, the microwave beeping. And then laughter. Emily's light, careless laugh drifting up the staircase, followed by the TV clicking on. My stomach churned, not with guilt, but with this strange, electrified anticipation. That night was her big date. She'd been gushing about it for days, some guy from work, apparently a real catch, the kind of man she usually bragged about but never kept around for long. I could hear her bustling around upstairs, the smell of her hairspray filling the hallway, the quick clip of her heels on the hardwood floor. Part of me hesitated. Part of me wondered if I'd gone too far, but another part, the tired, bitter part, reminded me how many times I'd walked into that kitchen to find another empty plate. And then it happened. I was in my room, the baby monitor from the living room turned on. Yes, I'd set one up, part of me horrified at myself, the other part fascinated, watching this train wreck in slow motion. First came the silence, a little too long. Then came the hurried footsteps, the shuffling of a purse, the faint panic in Emily's voice as she called out to her date. And then the unmistakable sound of the bathroom door slamming. Once. Twice. Both bathrooms. I sat there, a knot of tension in my chest slowly unwinding as the chaos unfolded downstairs. From the corner of the monitor, I caught a glimpse of her date sprinting down the hallway, hand clutched to his stomach, Emily pale and wild-eyed behind him, heels abandoned by the couch. The whole scene was part sitcom, part disaster movie, and all of it was unfolding right below my feet. And you know the worst part? I didn't feel bad. Not even a little. I didn't even have to wait long for the storm to hit. By the time I came downstairs, pretending to need a glass of water, Emily was pacing the living room like a caged animal, phone clutched in her hand, eyes wild with panic. Her date was long gone, his car screeching out of the driveway barely 10 minutes after the first bathroom sprint. I lingered near the kitchen door, watching her out of the corner of my eye, a calmness in me I hadn't felt in months. She saw me then. And oh, the fury. Her face twisted in a way I'd only seen once before, when our parents forgot our birthday dinner years ago. That mixture of betrayal and indignation that only someone convinced of their own specialness can truly summon. She charged toward me, voice shaking, words tumbling out too fast to catch at first, but I understood the essence. How dare I? What kind of monster does this? She had a big night. He was important. I just stood there, arms folded, listening like she was reciting a weather report. And then, the moment that sealed it. Our parents walked in. They'd been out at a movie, blissfully unaware, but the second they stepped through that door, Emily spun toward them like a performer hitting her mark. The tears came instantly, the trembling voice, the whole desperate show. She told them everything, or at least her version of it. And for a moment, just a flicker, I saw our mother's eyes dart to mine, a tiny crack in the script. But it vanished. Of course it did. Mike, my father said, voice low with disappointment, I can't believe you'd do something so cruel. That was it. That was the part that broke something loose in me, the piece I'd been clinging to, the last thread of trying to please them. I felt it snap, quiet, but final. I took a breath, gave Emily one last look, and walked past them without a word. I could hear her voice rising behind me, the edge of triumph back in her tone. She thought she'd won. She thought she'd broken me. But here's the thing, sometimes, winning the argument means nothing when you've already lost the person. That night, I sat in my car outside the house for almost an hour. The cold crept through the windshield, the hum of the street lights filling the silence. I could see the living room window glowing, silhouettes moving behind the curtains, my parents, Emily, probably dissecting the whole night like vultures over a carcass. And me? I was sitting in the driveway of my own home, like a stranger, heart pounding not with anger anymore, but with something quieter, something heavier. I think that's when it really hit me, not just what Emily had done, but what I had allowed. For years, I'd played the role, the responsible one, the fixer, the peacemaker, the one who stayed late to help, who lent money without asking for it back, who forgave over and over. I had convinced myself that keeping the peace meant keeping the family intact. But peace without respect isn't peace at all. It's surrender. And maybe, just maybe, I'd been surrendering for years without even realizing it. I went for a drive after that, circling the quiet streets of our neighborhood, thinking about every time I'd let a little thing slide. Every time Emily forgot something was mine. Every time my parents brushed it under the rug. Every time I told myself it wasn't worth the fight. And where had it brought me? To this, watching my sister sabotage her own life and expecting me to hold the net underneath her. I thought about calling a friend, but who do you call when the thing breaking your heart is your own family? When I got back, the house was dark. Everyone had gone to bed, or at least pretended to. I climbed the stairs slowly, the weight of everything pressing down on me. I passed Emily's room, heard the soft buzz of her phone through the door, imagined her texting a dozen people, spinning the story her way, painting herself the victim once again. And for the first time in a long time, I felt something unexpected, relief. A quiet voice inside me whispered, "You don't have to carry this anymore." And standing there in that dark hallway, I realized it was right. Morning crept in through the blinds like a hesitant apology. I opened my eyes, not jolted awake but drifting into consciousness, the kind of slow return that feels both heavy and fragile. For a moment, I lay there staring at the ceiling, listening to the house breathe, the old radiator clicking, the faint creak of wood, the distant hum of a world that kept spinning, indifferent to last night's storm. I pushed myself out of bed, not with resolve, but with a quiet, reluctant surrender. The kitchen was still, the air cold, the kind of silence that usually felt suffocating, but this time, it felt like space. Space I hadn't realized I needed. I brewed coffee, moving on autopilot, and sat at the table, hands wrapped around the mug like it was the only solid thing left. My phone buzzed once, twice, 3 times. I didn't need to look to know who it was. Emily, maybe Mom, maybe both. Apologies? Explanations? Accusations? It didn't matter. I let it buzz against the table, that soft mechanical hum almost comforting, like a reminder they were still trying to pull me back into their orbit. But sitting there, watching the steam rise from my cup, I understood something that had been hovering at the edge of my mind for years. I was tired. Not just tired of Emily. Tired of them. Tired of playing the role they wrote for me, of being the steady one, the fixer, the one who always absorbed the impact so no one else had to feel it. And somewhere in that stillness, in that buzzing phone, in the chill of that room, I felt the smallest flicker of permission to step back, to stop carrying what was never mine to hold. Upstairs, I heard Emily's door creak open, the hurried patter of her bare feet, and the bathroom door slamming shut again. My lips curved, not in triumph, not in spite, but in something softer, like a goodbye no one would hear but me. It wasn't revenge that I wanted. It was distance. And maybe, for the first time in my life, I was ready to take it. By late afternoon, the house had stirred to life, but I remained a quiet shadow in the background. I didn't offer to make dinner. I didn't ask if anyone needed anything. I didn't do what I always did, smooth things over, make peace, carry the invisible weight. I sat on the back porch with a book I wasn't reading, watching the autumn light sink behind the neighbors' rooftops, feeling the cool air settle on my skin like a quiet verdict. Inside, I could hear Emily moving through the house, her voice low but sharp on the phone, probably recounting the night to her friends, twisting the story into something where she was the tragic heroine. My parents moved more carefully. I noticed footsteps softer, voices lower, like they were testing the ground under their feet. For the first time in years, they weren't sure what version of me they were about to meet. I stayed on that porch as the sun dipped lower, listening to the ordinary sounds of the world beyond our house. Kids playing basketball in the driveway down the street, a dog barking at a passing car, wind chimes rattling faintly next door. And I realized how long it had been since I had allowed myself to simply sit, not in anticipation, not in preparation to fix something, but just to be still. It wasn't a grand rebellion. I didn't pack a bag or slam a door or deliver a fiery speech. I just withheld the one thing they had come to depend on without realizing it, my constant, quiet management of everyone's mess. Around 7, my mother peeked her head out the back door, her voice soft, tentative. "Mike, you coming in for dinner?" For a moment, the old pull stirred in my chest, the reflex to rise, to smooth, to reassure. But I stayed seated, eyes on the fading light. "Not hungry," I said, voice calm, almost gentle. There was a pause, and then the door clicked shut again. And in that silence, I felt something shift, not in them, not yet, but in me. The next morning was when the cracks really began to show. I woke up to the smell of pancakes, Emily's so-called apology ritual. She was in the kitchen, chattering too brightly, laughing too hard at her own jokes, as if she could glue the broken pieces together with syrup and forced charm. But I didn't come down. I stayed upstairs, took a long shower, let the hot water run over me until the mirror fogged and the sounds below faded to a distant hum. When I finally emerged, I could hear their voices drifting up, Emily trying to fill the silence with noise, my mother gently coaxing, my father's low grumble of disapproval just under the surface. They wanted me to come back to the table. They wanted things to snap back to normal. But normal was exactly what had worn me down to the bone. I went out for a walk instead. Cool autumn air, leaves crunching under my shoes, the familiar streets strangely unfamiliar when you walk them without your usual weight. I let myself breathe in a way I hadn't in years. When I came home, the pancakes were cold, the kitchen quiet. My mother was sitting at the table, her hands folded, waiting. Emily was nowhere to be seen, probably retreated to her room to lick her wounds or text her friends about how dramatic I was being. My father sat in his recliner, a sports channel murmuring in the background, pretending none of this was happening. Mom looked up at me, her eyes tired, but not unkind. She asked if I wanted to sit, to talk. For a moment, I almost said yes. Habit tugged at me like an old coat. But then I saw the stack of plates on the counter, the familiar grooves of family routine, the unspoken script waiting to be recited, the apologies, the half-promises, the reset. And I realized, no, not today. I told her softly, not now, Mom, and I walked past, up the stairs, into my room, closing the door behind me with a quiet click that sounded more final than any shouting match ever could. It's a strange thing, the moment you stop asking for permission. That evening, I watched from my window as Emily left the house, keys jangling, coat thrown over one shoulder, still radiating that restless energy, still running from whatever discomfort she didn't want to face. She didn't knock on my door, didn't call up the stairs, didn't even text. In that silence, it spoke volumes. Downstairs, I could hear my parents moving through the motions. My father's footsteps heavy and deliberate, the scrape of a chair being pulled out, the soft clatter of dishes. My mother's voice floated up now and then, quiet, strained, as if she were trying to keep the seams of the house from splitting. But there was an emptiness to it all, like they were rehearsing a play with one of the main actors missing. And maybe that's exactly what was happening. I stayed upstairs. I read a little. I paced a little. And somewhere in the middle of it, I realized I was waiting, but not for them. For myself. Waiting to see if I'd cave, if I'd go downstairs, if I'd step back into the pattern like I always had before. But the moment never came. Instead, a different thought settled in. Maybe they needed to feel my absence. Maybe for once, it wasn't my job to fix it, to close the gap, to smooth the edges. Maybe letting them sit with the discomfort was the most honest thing I could do. When I finally turned out the light, the house had gone still again. I lay in the dark, listening to the quiet, and for the first time in what felt like forever, it wasn't a silence that swallowed me. It was a silence that held me up. The days that followed were quiet, but not the kind of quiet I used to dread. This was a different silence, less like walking on eggshells, more like clearing away the clutter. Emily stayed out of my way, at first out of anger, maybe, or embarrassment, but gradually out of something that almost resembled caution. My parents moved around me like they weren't sure what version of their son they were dealing with now. And the truth? I wasn't sure either. But I knew this. Something in me had shifted, and there was no going back. One afternoon, my mother sat down beside me on the porch. No apologies, no speeches, just the two of us, watching the trees sway in the wind. She reached over, gave my hand a brief squeeze, and for once, no words were needed. I squeezed back. And that was enough. Emily never apologized. I didn't expect her to. But slowly, the house recalibrated. She stopped taking my food. Stopped slipping into my space. Maybe she understood, or maybe she just sensed that something in the ecosystem had changed, and the old tricks wouldn't land the same way. As for me, I found myself breathing easier. I started going for more walks. I called friends I hadn't spoken to in months. I picked up hobbies I'd long ago set aside, not for lack of time, but from the exhaustion of holding a family together by the seams. One night, sitting on the porch under a fading sky, I realized something. This wasn't the end of my relationship with them. It was the beginning of something real. Something with boundaries. With honesty. With space for me to exist, not just as a role I filled, but as a person. And if they couldn't accept that, then, for the first time, I was ready to let go.